A white millionaire's wife gave birth to twins, one white and one black. Immediately her husband did this. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly in the delivery room, casting a stark glow over the charged atmosphere. Outside, the hospital buzzed with life. Nurses rushed by, the squeak of carts echoed down the halls, and the distant hum of announcements blended into the background. But inside the room, the world had narrowed to Nicole's labored breaths and Ronald's trembling grasp on her hand. "Breathe, Nicole," Ronald murmured, his voice barely holding steady. He brushed a damp strand of her hair from her forehead, though the lines of worry etched deep into his face betrayed his attempt to appear calm. Nicole winced, her body racked by another contraction. I can't," she gasped, her words suffocated by exhaustion and pain. "Yes, you can," Ronald urged, leaning closer. "You're strong. You're so close now." Dr. Taylor, professional and composed, glanced up from the foot of the bed. "Nicole, one more push," she instructed firmly. "You've got this." A guttural scream tore from Nicole as her body summoned every ounce of strength. For a moment, it felt as though the universe itself held its breath. Then, the room filled with the sharp cry of a newborn. "It's a girl," announced a nurse, lifting the tiny, wriggling infant for all to see. Relief surged through Ronald, a wave of joy crashing over his chest as his eyes fell on the fragile life they had created. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "Ava." The moment was fleeting. "There's another," Dr. Taylor interjected, her tone sharpening with urgency. Nicole's body tensed once more, the agony of another contraction gripping her like a vice. Ronald felt her nails dig into his hand as she braced herself for the final push. Moments later, a second cry pierced the room. But when the nurse lifted the second baby into the sterile air, the room fell into stunned silence. The infant's skin was a warm, rich brown, stark contrast to her sister's pale complexion. "Congratulations," the nurse said hesitantly, her gaze flickering between the parents. Ronald's chest tightened. A cold weight settled over him as his mind raced with questions too heavy to voice. His heart pounded in his ears as he stared at the child. The sound of heels clicking sharply against the tile floor broke the tension. Natalie swept into the room, her commanding presence filling the space. Her eyes locked onto the newborns and her expression froze, morphing into a mask of fury. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice low but laced with venom. Ronald turned, his voice faltering as he faced his mother. Words failed him. Natalie stepped closer, her finger trembling as she pointed at the darker-skinned baby. "That child cannot be yours," she declared, her tone cold and slicing through the room like a blade. "Mother, please," Ronald pleaded, his voice strained. But Natalie's fury was unrelenting. Her scornful gaze turned to Nicole, who lay exhausted yet defiant. "You've brought shame upon this family," Natalie spat. "How dare you disgrace us like this?" Nicole's lips quivered, but her voice was steady. "This is your granddaughter. Both of them are," she said, her tone resolute. "Granddaughter," Natalie barked out a bitter laugh. "You expect me to accept this proof of your betrayal?" Enough, Ronald's voice cracked, breaking through the growing chaos. He stepped between his mother and his wife, raising his hands in a desperate attempt to restore order. The joy of earlier had been replaced by a storm of confusion and guilt. Natalie's tone softened but remained cutting. "You know what this will do to the Thomas name. People will talk. They'll call us fools. You must send her away, both of them." Ronald's gaze shifted to Nicole, her tear-streaked face reflecting hurt and betrayal. Natalie gripped Ronald's arm firmly. "Do what's right for this family," she pressed. Nicole's voice broke the heavy silence. "Ronald, please," she whispered. Unable to meet her gaze, Ronald's hand moved to his pocket, pulling out the necklace he had designed for her years ago. Its delicate gold chain glinted under the harsh light. He pressed it into Nicole's trembling hand. "Please, take care of her," he whispered hoarsely. Tears spilled down Nicole's cheeks as she clutched the necklace tightly. Her eyes lingered on Ronald, searching for something she could no longer find. Without another word, she turned, cradling her daughter, and walked away. The door clicked shut, leaving an unbearable silence in its wake. Ronald stood frozen, his hand outstretched, as though trying to grasp something already lost. Behind him, Natalie's heels clicked against the floor as she moved closer, her voice sharp. This was for the best, she declared. But Ronald didn't answer. His gaze remained fixed on the closed door, the echo of Nicole's footsteps fading into the night. Inside him, an ache grew deeper, carving out a hollow space where hope once resided. The Thomas mansion, once a sanctuary of wealth and pride, now felt suffocating. The grandeur of its marble halls and towering columns could not conceal the weight of Ronald's regret. Ronald sank heavily into a chair, his head buried in his hands. The faint cries of AVA echoed through the room, a haunting reminder of what still remained in the love that had slipped away. Natalie stood tall beside him, her expression triumphant, yet Ronald felt only the crushing weight of his own regret. Outside, the muffled hum of city traffic filtered through the silence of the apartment. Nicole moved methodically, her hands trembling slightly as she packed a small suitcase on the worn kitchen table. Each motion was deliberate, her focus sharp and unyielding, the kind that comes when there's no room to dwell on pain. Nearby, Layla stirred in her bassinet, her soft cries piercing through the quiet. Nicole paused, her breath catching as she tucked a warm blanket around her daughter's tiny frame. "Is this what you wanted?" Nicole asked, her voice steady but laced with quiet accusation. She didn't turn to look at him, her back rigid and unyielding as she faced the table. I didn't want this," Ronald stammered, his words faltering under the weight of guilt. He raked a hand through his hair, his eyes darting between Nicole and Natalie, who loomed like a shadow near the doorway. "This isn't what I wanted." Natalie scoffed, stepping forward with deliberate malice. "What you wanted doesn't matter anymore, does it?" she said coldly. "What matters is salvaging what's left of the Thomas family's reputation." Nicole's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't look back. She continued packing, placing a few baby clothes into the suitcase, followed by a worn storybook she had read to Layla during countless sleepless nights. The ordinary item seemed a cruel mockery of the extraordinary heartbreak she was enduring. "Stop it," Mother Ronald said, his voice low and strained. "You've done enough." "Enough," Natalie snapped, her tone sharp and unforgiving. "I'm fixing your mess, Ronald. Do you think the world won't notice? Do you think they won't whisper about the Thomas name being dragged through the mud?" Nicole turned then, her gaze steady and piercing. "You think this is about your name?" she said, her voice soft yet unyielding. "You think Layla, my child, is some blemish to be erased?" She stepped closer, her words slicing through the air like knives. "Call it shame, betrayal, whatever you need to sleep at night. But the truth is, you're nothing but a bitter woman who's forgotten what love truly looks like." Natalie's face hardened, though her lips trembled slightly. Before she could respond, Ronald stepped between them, his hands raised in a futile attempt to maintain peace. His voice wavered as he said, "Enough." His eyes met Nicole's, and the full weight of his failure bore down on him like a crushing wave. "Nicole, please," he began. "Please what?" Nicole's voice cracked, though she kept her composure. "Please understand why you're letting her do this. Please forgive you for abandoning us when we needed you most." Ronald opened his mouth, but no words came. He couldn't defend himself, not against the truth she spoke so plainly. It was the truth he had been too weak to confront since the moment his world unraveled in that hospital room. Layla's soft wail broke the suffocating silence. Nicole crossed the room, gently brushing her fingers over Layla's cheek as she murmured soothing words. Ronald's gaze lingered on the baby, her dark skin reflecting back all his fears, his doubts, and the overwhelming sense of his own failures. "I didn't ask for this," he finally said, his voice hollow. "I didn't ask for any of this." Nicole straightened, cradling Layla tightly against her chest. Her expression softened, but the hurt in her eyes remained. "Neither did I," Ronald, she replied quietly. but here we are." She moved toward the door, the small suitcase in one hand and her daughter in the other. Instinctively, Ronald stepped forward, blocking her path. His breath hitched as he fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a delicate gold necklace he had once given her as a symbol of love. The chain glinted faintly in the dim light as he pressed it into her hand. "For Layla," he said softly, "so she'll have something to remember us." Nicole's fingers closed around the necklace, trembling slightly. She didn't speak, but her expression said everything. She would take it, though it could never undo what had been broken. Natalie cleared her throat sharply, her voice cutting through the moment. "Well, if the theatrics are over." Enough. Ronald's voice rang out, sharp and unexpected, startling everyone in the room. He turned to Natalie, his jaw clenched with rare defiance. "Leave." Natalie blinked in shock but said nothing as she retreated to the far side of the room, her heels clicking softly against the floor. Nicole adjusted Layla in her arms and gave Ronald one last look. Her eyes held no anger, only a quiet sadness and resignation. Without a word, she stepped past him and closed the door behind her with a soft click. Ronald stood motionless, his hand still outstretched as if to grasp something he could never hold on to. Behind him, Natalie's heels tapped softly as she approached. "This was the right choice," she said firmly. But Ronald didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on the door, the faint sound of Nicole's footsteps echoing in his ears. Inside him, the hollow ache grew deeper, carving out a chasm of loss that no words could fill. The Thomas mansion, once a beacon of pride and legacy, now felt heavy with regret. Its grand halls and polished marble offered no solace to a man consumed by the weight of his choices. Inside him, the hollow ache deepened, carving a chasm of regret too vast to bridge. Ronald Thomas sat alone in the stillness of the Thomas mansion. Its grand halls, once a source of pride and comfort, now suffocated him. The air felt thick, burdened by memories of decisions he could never reverse and words that lingered in the void, unspoken yet unforgiven. Above the sprawling oak dining table, the ornate chandelier swayed gently, casting flickering shadows as the wind battered the windows. Ronald sat at the head of the table, his posture heavy with weariness. Before him lay a pile of fragile, yellowed documents and time-worn letters. The musty scent of aged paper filled the room, mingling with the faint, familiar aroma of polished wood. Elbows braced against the table, he rubbed his temples, fighting the storm of emotions swirling in his mind. These papers, meticulously curated by his great-grandfather, were his last hope, a lifeline to answers buried beneath generations of silence. Faintly, Natalie's sharp voice echoed from another room, her clipped orders punctuating the air like a refrain from his youth. Ronald ignored her, tuning out the tone that had shaped his life for as long as he could remember. Natalie's voice had become as much a part of the mansion as its creaking floorboards, but tonight he sought something far deeper: peace, clarity, and truth. As his fingers brushed the edge of a fragile envelope, a jolt of unease mixed with curiosity surged through him. The faded ink, barely legible, spelled out "My dearest Amanda" in a slanted, deliberate hand. Carefully, Ronald unfolded the letter, the crackling parchment betraying its age. "My dearest Amanda, the world may never understand us, but our love is stronger than their hate. They see only what separates us: my pale skin, your dark hands, but we see the truth. Our hearts are bound by something far greater than the narrow minds of those who condemn us. I write this so that our children and their children will one day know love is not defined by the color of skin, but by the courage to stand together against all odds. Yours always, Robert." Ronald's breath hitched as the words seeped into his soul. The truth emerged with a jarring clarity, like a long-lost puzzle piece snapping into place. Amanda, his great-grandmother, had been black. The esteemed Thomas name, which Natalie upheld with iron will, was built on a foundation of mixed heritage. Leaning back in his chair, the letter trembling in his grasp, Ronald felt a surge of emotions he couldn't contain. Memories of Nicole's tearful face and Layla's innocent cries flooded his mind. Layla's deep brown skin and her soulful eyes were not marks of disgrace, but echoes of a legacy buried beneath layers of denial and prejudice. A faint creak pulled him from his thoughts. Natalie entered the room, her sharp features illuminated by the dim chandelier light. Her eyes scanned the disheveled papers, her lips tightening into a disapproving frown. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. Ronald held up the letter, his voice low but heavy with accusation. "Did you know?" Natalie crossed her arms, lifting her chin with defiance. "Know what?" "That Amanda, our great-grandmother, was black," Ronald said, his voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "Did you know?" Natalie's face hardened, though a flicker of unease flashed in her eyes. "It doesn't matter," she snapped. "That was generations ago. It's irrelevant." Ronald shot up from his chair, the screech of wood against marble punctuating his rage. "Irrelevant," he echoed, his voice rising. "You forced me to send Nicole and Layla away. You made me believe," he broke off, his voice trembling. "You made me doubt my own wife, my own daughter." Natalie's jaw clenched, but her resolve didn't waver. "Nicole was never suitable for this family," she said coldly. "And that child would have destroyed us. I did what was necessary to protect you." "Protect me?" Ronald's bitter laugh echoed through the room. "You didn't protect me. You destroyed my family. You destroyed me." Turning away, he gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white with tension. The weight of his guilt pressed down like a storm threatening to consume him. Every memory, Nicole's tear-streaked face, Layla's cries as they left, rose like a tidal wave, crashing over him with unbearable force. "I need to fix this," he muttered, more to himself than to Natalie. Her heels clicked against the floor as she approached. "Fix it," she said sharply. "Don't be ridiculous. What's done is done. You can't rewrite the past." Ronald turned to face her, his eyes blazing with a determination she hadn't seen in years. "Maybe I can't undo it," he said, his voice steady and resolute, "but I can try to make it right." Natalie opened her mouth to protest, but Ronald didn't wait. He stormed out of the room, the letter clutched tightly in his hand. For the first time in years, his purpose was clear. Ascending the grand staircase to his study, he felt the numbness that had paralyzed him for so long give way to unshakable resolve. He didn't know how he would find them, Nicole and Layla, Oregon, if they would even allow him back into their lives. But he had to try, for Nicole, for Layla, for the family he had failed so deeply. That night, Nicole left, and Ronald stood by the large bay window in his study. He gazed out at the sprawling gardens of the Thomas mansion. The sunset stretched across the horizon in muted shades of orange and gray, but Ronald barely noticed. His thoughts were consumed by a deep ache of guilt and the faint flicker of hope that had driven him to act. Weeks earlier, Ronald had hired private investigators, men who promised discretion and results. The mission was straightforward: find Nicole and Layla. The investigators scoured towns, chased whispers, and pursued every lead, but each report came back the same. No trace of Nicole. No sign of Layla. "It's as though they vanished," Mr. Thomas, one investigator, had told him over the phone that morning. Ronald tightened his grip on the receiver, the words weighing heavily in his chest. There was something rehearsed in the man's tone, something final, as if they had already decided to abandon the search. What Ronald didn't know was that Natalie had been pulling strings in secret. She wasn't one to leave loose ends untied. A well-placed bribe here, a veiled threat there, and the investigators quickly learned not to dig too deeply. For Natalie, this was simply a necessary step in safeguarding the family's reputation, name she refused to see tarnished by a child she could not accept. Ronald ended the call with a heavy sigh, the burden of his failure pressing down harder than ever. He turned back to the window, watching the sinking sun cast long, jagged shadows across his face. Somewhere out there, Nicole and Layla were forging a new life, a life he wasn't part of. In the unassuming town of Midbury, Vermont, Nicole was rebuilding from the ground up. The clapper house she rented leaned precariously to one side, its peeling white paint betraying years of neglect. Yet, for Nicole, it was a sanctuary, a haven. Inside, the air was brisk, even in spring, but the chill didn't matter. Each morning before the sun rose, Nicole bundled Layla in layers to fight the cold. She carried her daughter to the local diner where she worked as a waitress. Nicole navigated the clamor of breakfast rushes with practiced grace, balancing trays of eggs and steaming mugs of coffee. The tips were meager, crumpled bills that hardly made a dent, but every penny was saved for Layla. By the time Nicole's second shift at the grocery store ended, exhaustion weighed heavily on her body. Yet, as she stepped through the door of their little house, the sight of Layla toddling toward her on unsteady legs melted the day's weariness. Mama Layla squealed, her tiny arms waving in delight. Her wide brown eyes sparkled, eyes that often made strangers pause and stare. Nicole scooped her up, ignoring the protest of her aching shoulders. "Did you miss me, sweet pea?" Nicole murmured, planting a soft kiss on her daughter's curls. Layla nodded, her little fingers tugging at the delicate chain around Nicole's neck. The gold necklace gift from Ronald caught the dim light. It was all Nicole had left of the life she once believed was forever. Dinner was simply a pot of beans and rice simmering quietly on the stove while Layla played with a well-loved, battered toy truck. Nicole leaned against the counter, watching her child with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. But even in this quiet town, whispers followed them. At the grocery store, women in tailored coats exchanged looks as Layla babbled in her mother's arms. At the hardware store, an old man's gaze lingered too long, his eyes narrowing as though trying to unravel a puzzle. Nicole held her head high, her dignity intact. But at night, when Layla slept and the house was silent, Nicole let herself cry not from regret but from the fear that Layla might one day feel incomplete. One crisp afternoon, as Nicole rocked Layla on the porch, the sharp crack of a car backfiring startled them both. Layla flinched, pressing her small body tightly against her mother's chest. Nicole held her close, humming softly until her daughter's breathing calmed. "Mama," Layla said suddenly, her voice tinged with curiosity, "why do people look at me funny?" The question cut through Nicole like a winter chill. How could she explain prejudice to a heart so pure, so innocent? She gazed at her daughter's trusting face, her mind racing. Finally, Nicole shifted Layla onto her lap and brushed a curl from her forehead. "Sweetheart," Nicole began gently, "sometimes people don't understand things that are different. But do you know what?" Layla tilted her head, her brown eyes wide with curiosity. "What?" Nicole smiled, her voice warm and steady. "Different doesn't mean bad. It means special. You and I were like this house." She gestured to the worn porch beneath them. "It may not look like much to some, but it's strong. It keeps us safe. And you, my little Layla, are the strongest person I know." Layla giggled, resting her head against her mother's chest. "I'm strong like the house." Nicole chuckled softly, tightening her embrace. "Stronger," she whispered, her voice cracking just slightly. That evening, after tucking Layla into bed, Nicole took the necklace from around her neck and placed it gently into her daughter's tiny hand. "This is part of your story," Nicole said quietly. "One day you'll understand how special it makes you." Layla nodded, her eyelids growing heavy with sleep. Nicole lingered by her side, watching her for a long moment. Her heart ached with love and fierce determination. Whatever the world threw at them, Nicole vowed that Layla would never feel anything less than whole. That night, Nicole left and Ronald stood by the large bay window in his study. His gaze lingered on the sprawling gardens of the Thomas mansion, their carefully tended beauty stark against the gray-orange hues of the fading sunset. Yet Ronald barely noticed the view. His mind was awash with guilt, tangled in the ache of lost choices, and propelled by the faint glimmer of hope that kept him moving forward. Meanwhile, in a modest house at the edge of Midbury, Vermont, Nicole whispered to the sleeping Layla, "One day you'll understand how special it makes you." Layla nodded sleepily, her small fingers curling around the delicate necklace Nicole had placed in her hand. As the weight of the day pulled her eyelids closed, Nicole watched her daughter with unwavering love and fierce determination. Their life wasn't easy. It wasn't fair. But as Nicole stood by the window of their small, silent home, looking out into the quiet night, she made herself a solemn vow. "Different doesn't mean broken," she whispered into the darkness, "and I'll make sure she knows it every single day." The words hung in the air, heavy as a prayer. Somewhere far away, Ronald might have been searching for them, but Nicole wasn't waiting. She was busy building a life for the only thing that mattered now, Layla. The Thomas mansion, in contrast, loomed large in its grandeur. Its marble floors gleamed beneath towering columns, each detail a testament to generations of wealth and legacy. Yet to Ava, it was nothing more than a cold, lonely fortress. Its sprawling halls and impeccably curated rooms offered no warmth, only faint shadows of a childhood she could scarcely recall. Her memories of her mother, Nicole, were fleeting: the soft touch of a hand, the echo of gentle laughter, the lingering scent of lavender. These memories had long been replaced by the strict regimen imposed by Natalie Thomas. "Sit up straight." Natalie snapped, her voice slicing through the quiet of the grand dining room like a whip. Ava, hunching over her plate, froze mid-motion. Her 6-year-old spine stiffened as she obediently adjusted her posture. Natalie's critical gaze swept over her granddaughter before she gave a curt nod. "A proper Thomas doesn't slouch." "Yes," Grandmother Ava murmured. Her voice was clear but subdued, the tone of someone who had learned that arguing was futile. Natalie ruled with an iron will, ensuring Ava's days were packed with piano lessons, etiquette classes, and rigorous academic schedules. While Natalie was never openly cruel, her affection was locked away, wrapped tightly within her pursuit of perfection. Mistakes were met with stern corrections, not compassion. Occasionally, fleeting moments of approval would slip through Natalie's facade. When Ava played a flawless piece on the piano or recited poetry without hesitation, Natalie's gaze would soften. She would pat Ava's head and murmur, "Good girl." Ava, starved for connection, basked in those rare moments of praise. But there was a shadow that even Natalie's discipline couldn't chase away. It resided in the weary eyes of Ronald, who wandered through the mansion like a ghost. He was gentle in his interactions with Ava, asking about her lessons or admiring her drawings. Yet, a sorrow lingered in his voice, a burden Ava was too young to understand. One evening, as Ava curled in an armchair with a book, she turned to Natalie, who was reading nearby. "Why is Papa so sad?" she asked, her voice small but curious. Natalie stiffened but didn't lift her gaze. "Your father has many responsibilities," she replied curtly. "Running the Thomas estate isn't easy." Ava frowned. "But he doesn't talk about work. He just sits by the window." "That's enough," Natalie said sharply, her tone allowing no further questions. "You have your piano practice to finish." The question lingered in Ava's mind, unanswered. Yet Ronald's sadness was ever present, seeping into his interactions in ways he couldn't hide. When he tucked Ava in at night, his hand would linger on her hair, and his voice would tremble as he whispered, "Good night, my darling." Though Ava didn't know the names Nicole or Layla, she felt the absence of something or someone she couldn't name. It was a quiet void, an ache she didn't fully understand. Natalie filled the silence with discipline, shaping Ava into the perfect Thomas heir. Ronald, on the other hand, offered small smiles and fleeting moments of tenderness that hinted at his buried regrets. Ava grew up in the shadow of both, striving to meet Natalie's expectations while yearning for the connection she sensed her father couldn't provide. As the years passed, Ava learned to navigate the strict expectations of the Thomas household. She excelled in academics, played piano with precision, and carried herself with the poised grace Natalie demanded. But at night, in the stillness of her room, Ava would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind swirling with questions she couldn't articulate. She had no way of knowing that her father's sorrow was rooted in the loss of a family she had never met, a mother and a sister whose absence haunted Ronald's every step. And though Ava didn't yet understand, she felt the weight of that unspoken loss. It shaped her world in quiet, invisible ways, creating ripples she couldn't yet see but would one day have to face. The campus of Cornell University thrived with energy. Students moved briskly between classes, their chatter weaving a tapestry of ambition and ideas. Among them, Ava Thomas stood out with her poised demeanor, her upbringing reflected in her graceful posture and polished words. Her semester had been both demanding and invigorating, and the university's robust social justice scene had immediately captured her interest. It was during one of these meetings, held in a brightly lit room at the campus community center, that Ava first noticed Layla Thomas. The group was small, with 15 students seated in a loose circle discussing plans for an upcoming project to support underprivileged youth. Ava had confidently presented ideas for securing funding when Layla entered, slightly breathless but radiating warmth. She apologized for her tardiness, her tone easy yet assured. Ava couldn't help but be drawn to the newcomer. Layla's sharp intelligence, the conviction in her words, and her quiet strength exuded an undeniable magnetism. Her deep brown skin and natural curls framed a face that was strikingly beautiful, yet kind. As the meeting concluded and students began to disperse, Layla approached Ava. "You had some excellent points in there," she remarked, her smile brightening. Ava returned the smile. "Thanks, you're new to the group." Layla nodded. "Yeah, just transferred this semester." "Thought I'd dive in," she extended a hand. "I'm Layla." "Ava," she replied, shaking Layla's hand. Their connection was instant, the kind of natural ease that makes conversation flow effortlessly. They walked toward the library together, discovering their shared passion for community work and their commitment to creating meaningful change. The next day, as the lecture hall buzzed with activity, Ava adjusted her bag and scanned the room. Her gaze settled on a familiar figure sitting a few rows ahead. It was Layla. Her vibrant presence seemed to fill the room, from her easy smile to the animated gestures she used while speaking with her peers. The professor's lecture on systemic inequality in urban housing began, but Ava found her attention drifting toward Layla. There was something hauntingly familiar about her, though Ava couldn't place why. As class ended and students began to file out, Ava found herself walking beside her. "Hey," Ava ventured, her tone warm but tentative. Layla turned, her smile widening. "Hi, Ava." Their names hung in the air for a beat before they both chuckled. "Well, that's not confusing at all," Layla said, grinning. "Not at all," Ava laughed. "Do you have a minute? I'd love to grab coffee and talk more about today's lecture." Layla nodded eagerly. "Sure, that was intense, wasn't it? I'd love to untangle it over some caffeine." At the campus cafe, the conversation flowed as if they'd known each other for years. Layla spoke passionately about her volunteer work with a nonprofit that focused on affordable housing. There was a raw honesty in her experiences, shaped by challenges Ava could scarcely imagine. "My mom is the reason I do this," Layla said, her fingers brushing the delicate gold necklace around her neck. "She worked tirelessly to show me I was more than what others thought of me." Ava's gaze lingered on the necklace, its simple beauty captivating. "That's lovely," she said softly. "Was it hers?" Layla nodded, her voice softening. "She gave it to me before she passed. She said it was a part of my story for a moment. Her usual brightness dimmed. I wear it every day so I don't forget." Ava instinctively reached across the table, her hand brushing Layla's. "She sounds incredible." Layla's smile returned, though tinged with sadness. She was. She never let me think being different was a bad thing. Their conversation shifted, and soon Layla turned the question back to Ava. "What about you? You seem so put together. What brought you to social justice?" Ava hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "My dad, I think. He's always been kind, but there's a sadness about him. I guess part of me wants to understand it. Helping others feels like a way to connect with him." Layla tilted her head thoughtfully. "That's heavy. Do you think you'll ever talk to him about it? I'm not sure, Ava admitted, but I hope to someday. As the cafe emptied and the sun dipped below the horizon, Ava glanced at her watch. Hey, you should come to dinner at my house, she said impulsively. My dad would love to meet you, and I'd love to keep talking. Layla looked surprised but pleased. Are you sure? I wouldn't want to intrude. You wouldn't be, Ava insisted. Please. After everything you've shared, it's the least I can do. Layla hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right. Dinner sounds wonderful. As they parted, Ava's mind buzzed with anticipation. Neither she nor Layla could have known how deeply their lives were intertwined, or how this simple invitation would lead to a collision of stories that would change them both forever. Layla could not have foreseen how her story and the cherished necklace she wore was about to intertwine with a past neither she nor Ava had ever known they shared. The Thomas mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, had changed drastically in the 3 years since Natalie's passing. The oppressive weight of her commanding presence had lifted, replaced by an unsettling void. Ronald, no longer confined by his mother's rigid expectations, now drifted through the mansion's vast halls like a shadow. The grandeur remained, but the house had become a hollow shell, heavy with memories and haunted by regret. In the dining room, the gleaming mahogany table was immaculately set for 3. Ronald sat at the head, his hands clasped together, staring into the flickering candlelight, as if seeking answers in its soft glow. From the foyer, Ava's lively voice echoed, full of warmth and excitement. Dad, this is Layla, Ava announced as she entered, guiding a young woman into the room. Ronald rose, offering a polite but distant smile. Yet the sight of Layla unsettled him. Her striking features, the confidence with which she carried herself, and the unmistakable glint of the necklace around her neck, all of it made his heart clench painfully. Layla, this is my dad, Ava said, her face alight with pride. It's wonderful to meet you, Mr. Thomas, Layla said, extending her hand with a steady smile. There was warmth in her voice, and when Ronald hesitated before taking her hand, her expression softened, sensing his unease. Welcome, Ronald said at last, his voice tight, the words scraping out as his throat constricted. The 3 settled at the table, and Ava's animated chatter filled the space. She spoke enthusiastically about their shared university classes, the campus project they were collaborating on, and how invaluable Layla's contributions had been. At first, Layla remained reserved, but as the conversation unfolded, she began to share fragments of her own story, her childhood, her late mother, and the challenges they had faced together. Ronald listened with an intensity that went beyond polite interest. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, questions he couldn't bring himself to voice aloud. Each detail Layla revealed the sacrifices of her mother, her resilience, and the values instilled in her seemed to tug at a deeply buried truth. She always told me I was special, Layla said softly, absent-mindedly brushing her fingers over the gold necklace resting against her collarbone. She said this necklace carried part of our story, but she never really explained what she meant. It's all I have of her now. Ronald froze, his breath catching. The necklace was unmistakable. The intricate design, the delicate clasp, it was the one he had given to Nicole so many years ago. His hand tightened around his napkin beneath the table, his composure teetering. That's a beautiful necklace, he managed, his voice strained. Layla glanced down at it, a faint smile gracing her lips. Thank you. It's my most treasured possession. Ronald's gaze flicked toward Ava, who was absorbed in the conversation, oblivious to the turmoil roiling inside her father. Could this young woman across from him truly be Layla, his Layla? As the evening wore on, his suspicions grew louder. Every word Layla spoke seemed to align too perfectly with the truths he had buried for years, yet fear and uncertainty held him back from speaking. After dessert, Ava excused herself, disappearing upstairs to retrieve a book she wanted to show Layla. Left alone, the air between Ronald and Layla grew heavier. Layla, Ronald began cautiously, his voice trembling. "Your mother. She must have been an extraordinary woman." Layla looked at him, her guarded expression softening. "She was," she said, her voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. "She raised me on her own and gave me everything she could. I just wish she could see me now." Ronald hesitated, the weight of his unspoken confession pressing down on him. Before he could find the courage to continue, Ava returned, her lively energy breaking the tension. "Layla, you have to see this book," Ava said brightly. "It's all about the impact of housing policies on marginalized communities." Layla smiled, taking the book and flipping through its pages, and the conversation shifted once more. Later that evening, after Ava and Layla had said their goodbyes, Ronald retreated to his study. The mansion, now quiet, seemed to press in around him. He descended to the dining room, picking up the coffee cup Layla had used before the house staff could clear it away. It was a small object, but to Ronald it was tangible proof of the evening's surreal revelations. He clutched the cup, his mind racing. The resemblance. The necklace. Layla's story. It couldn't be mere coincidence. His heart pounded as he reached for the phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. "This is Ronald Thomas," he said, his voice low but steady. "I need a DNA test done," quietly. As the call ended, Ronald leaned back in his chair, the enormity of his decision settling over him. If his suspicions were correct, the young woman who had sat at his table tonight was not just a guest. She was his daughter. The house was silent, save for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Ronald sat alone in his study, a sealed envelope resting on the desk before him. The DNA test results had arrived earlier that morning, delivered by a courier who barely lingered. For hours, Ronald stared at the envelope, possibilities swirling through his mind like a relentless storm. Finally, with trembling hands, he tore it open. The words leaped off the page: parent-child relationship, 99.9% probability. Ronald's breath hitched. It was true, Layla was his daughter. Relief and dread intertwined, tangling in his chest as his thoughts turned to Nicole. He had failed her, failed both of them. A note attached to the report confirmed his worst fear: Nicole had passed away 2 years earlier. The weight of it all bore down on him, threatening to crush what little resolve remained. Yet, as the first wave of despair ebbed, determination rose in its place. He couldn't change the past, but perhaps he could mend the future. Later that evening, Ronald summoned both Ava and Layla to the Thomas mansion, insisting the meeting was urgent. The dining room was prepared, though less formal than usual. Ava arrived first, her cheerful chatter a welcome reprieve from the heavy air. Yet her father's strained expression didn't escape her notice. "Dad, is something wrong?" Ava asked, her brows knitting in concern. "Just a lot on my mind," Ronald replied, brushing off the question with a forced smile. When Layla arrived, the tension in the room became palpable. She greeted them warmly, unaware of the emotional minefield awaiting her. Dinner began with polite conversation, Ava animatedly recounting stories from campus life. Ronald remained mostly silent, his eyes drifting to Layla more often than not. Finally, unable to hold back any longer, Ronald set down his fork and cleared his throat. "Layla," he began, his voice measured but trembling. "There's something I need to tell you, both of you." Ava paused mid-sentence, her gaze darting between her father and Layla. "Okay," Layla said cautiously, her posture stiffening as an air of apprehension enveloped her. Ronald hesitated, the weight of his admission pressing heavily on his chest. "Layla, the necklace you wear. I know it." Layla's fingers instinctively grazed the pendant, her expression clouded with curiosity. "You do?" He nodded slowly. "I gave it to your mother, a long time ago." Confusion flickered in Layla's eyes. "My mother? But how?" Taking a deep breath, Ronald pressed forward, his voice breaking. "Layla, I believe. You're my daughter." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, thick and unyielding. Ava gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she turned to Layla. Layla froze, her face shifting between disbelief and anger. "What are you saying?" Layla demanded, her voice rising with each word. Ronald's voice faltered, but he pushed on. "I didn't know until recently. I had a DNA test done after our dinner. The results confirmed it. Layla, you're my daughter." The sound of a chair scraping against the floor cut through the room as Layla stood abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. "This has to be a joke," she said, her voice shaking with outrage. "You can't just show up and decide I'm your daughter out of nowhere." "It's not out of nowhere," Ronald said desperately. I made mistakes. Horrible mistakes. Your mother, Nicole, she was my wife, but I let her go. I let both of you go, and I've regretted it every single day." Layla's eyes burned with fury. "You let us go," she spat. "You abandoned us? My mother had to raise me on her own, and you what? Lived here in this mansion, feeling sorry for yourself." "Layla, please," Ronald pleaded, rising from his seat. "I was weak. I listened to the wrong people. I didn't know how to fix it." "Stop," Layla's voice cracked as she held up a trembling hand. "You don't get to make excuses. My mother worked herself to death to give me a life. And you just sat here." "Ava," Ronald began, but Ava cut him off. "Layla," Ava interjected softly, reaching for her. "Please." But Layla stepped back, her breaths coming hard and fast. "I can't do this," she said. "I can't be here." "Layla, wait," Ronald called after her, his voice breaking. But Layla was already at the door. She paused briefly, her back to them, before speaking one final time. "She deserved better than you," she whispered, the words carrying an unbearable weight. And with that she was gone. The door slammed shut, reverberating through the mansion's empty halls. Ronald collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. Across the table, Ava sat motionless, silent tears streaking her cheeks. "Dad," Ava said at last, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ronald lifted his head, his red-rimmed eyes filled with regret. "Because I was scared," he admitted. "And now I may have lost her forever." The room fell into a mournful silence, the weight of the evening settling heavily on both of them. Out in the cool night air, Layla wandered aimlessly through the streets, clutching her necklace like a lifeline. Her thoughts swirled chaotically: anger, betrayal, and a longing she fought to suppress. She found herself at a quiet park, empty save for a solitary bench illuminated by a dim street lamp. Sitting down, the tension in her body slowly unwound, replaced by exhaustion. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, soft but firm: "Never let anyone define your worth, Layla. You're stronger than that." But tonight, as tears welled in her eyes, she didn't feel strong. Not at all. A lone bench by the lake offered Layla a moment of solace. She sank into it, the tension in her shoulders slowly unraveling into exhaustion. Her mother's voice echoed softly in her memory: "Never let anyone define your worth, Layla. You're stronger than that." But tonight, she didn't feel strong. The campus of Cornell University was eerily quiet in the early morning light, the usual hustle subdued as students trickled into libraries and lecture halls. Layla sat on a bench near the quad, her hands wrapped tightly around a lukewarm coffee cup. Her mind churned, replaying Ronald's words from the night before, each one heavier than the last. The weight of it all: the sudden revelation of a father she didn't want to claim, the betrayal she couldn't yet forgive, and the flood of unanswered questions felt unbearable. She didn't notice Ronald's approach until his shadow stretched across her. Layla looked up sharply, her expression hardening as their eyes met. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone clipped and defensive. Ronald hesitated, shoving his hands deep into the pockets of his coat. His usual air of composure was gone, replaced by raw vulnerability. "I came to see you," he said softly. Layla scoffed, turning away. "You've done enough." "I know," Ronald replied, his voice faltering. He took a tentative step closer. "But I need you to hear me out, please." Layla's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't move to leave. Setting her coffee down on the bench beside her, she crossed her arms. "Fine," she said tersely. "Say whatever you came to say, then leave." Ronald lowered himself onto the bench, careful to keep a respectful distance. His clasped hands were white-knuckled, trembling slightly as he spoke. "I don't even know where to begin," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I've thought about this moment for years, but now that it's here." Layla's stony silence offered no comfort, but she didn't interrupt. "I want to tell you about your mother," Ronald continued, his gaze fixed on the ground. "Nicole was extraordinarily strong, compassionate, and so full of life. I loved her more than I can put into words." He paused, his voice catching. "But I failed her. I failed both of you." Layla's jaw tightened, but her focus remained on him, her guard firmly in place. "I let fear control me," Ronald admitted, his voice thick with regret. "Fear of my mother's judgment, fear of losing everything I thought I needed to protect. I was weak, and in my weakness I hurt the two people I should have stood by the most." When he finally lifted his eyes to meet hers, they were brimming with tears. "You didn't deserve that, Layla. Neither did Nicole. She deserved a partner who stood by her, not someone who let her walk away. And you deserved a father who fought for you, not one who hid behind excuses." Layla's lips trembled, her defenses faltering slightly. "You think saying this makes it better," she said, her voice sharp but shaking. "That it erases the years my mother struggled to give me what you couldn't." "No," Ronald said quickly, shaking his head. "I know it doesn't. I know I can never make up for what you lost. But I'm here now, Layla. I'm here because I want to try, if you'll let me." Layla turned away, her unshed tears shimmering in the morning light. She wanted to hate him, to walk away and shut out the pain he represented. But something in his voice, his brokenness, his sincerity made her hesitate. "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because I can't let fear rule me anymore," Ronald said simply. "Because I lost Nicole, and I can't lose you too. You're my daughter, Layla. And I want to be your father, if you'll let me." At that moment, Ava appeared, her face flushed from running. "Layla," she said breathlessly, her gaze darting between them. "I came as soon as Dad told me he was coming here." Layla stood abruptly, her emotions boiling over. "What, are you here to convince me too?" "No," Ava replied gently, stepping closer. "I'm here because I care about you, and because I know how much Dad regrets everything. He's not perfect, Layla, but he's trying. Please don't shut him out." Layla's gaze shifted between Ronald and Ava. The anger and betrayal swirling within her were still fresh, but beneath them, she felt a faint flicker of something else longing. Ronald rose slowly, his movements cautious. "Take your time," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll wait as long as you need. Just know how much I care about you." Layla stared at him for a long moment, the walls around her heart trembling. Finally, she turned back to the bench and picked up her coffee. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said quietly, her voice softer now. Ronald nodded, his expression pained but hopeful. "I understand." As he and Ava walked away, Layla remained seated, her coffee cooling in her hands. She didn't call them back, but she didn't leave either. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder what it might mean to have a father. "You think that'll fix everything?" Layla asked, her voice laced with skepticism. "No," Ronald admitted, his tone steady and honest. "But it's a start, and it's something we can do together." Layla studied him carefully, her guarded walls holding firm. Yet, after a long pause, she nodded slowly. "All right," she said, her words deliberate. "Let's see if you mean it." In the weeks that followed, the Thomas family found themselves working together in ways they hadn't imagined possible. Layla's deep understanding of nonprofit work, combined with Ava's boundless enthusiasm and Ronald's financial resources, created a synergy that started to heal old wounds. Small moments, shared laugh over Alva's clumsy baking experiments, or an impromptu brainstorming session in the study began to chip away at the walls Layla had carefully built around her heart. One quiet afternoon, as they sorted through photos for the initiative's promotional materials, Ronald handed Layla a framed picture of Nicole. Layla took it, her throat tightening as she stared at her mother's warm, familiar smile. Memories she had tried to bury rushed to the surface. "She was incredible," Ronald said softly, his voice brimming with reverence. "And you remind me so much of her." Layla's grip on the frame tightened. Her heart ached with both pride and the sharp sting of loss. "She deserved better," she said, her voice trembling. Ronald nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "She did. But I hope I can be better now for you and for her memory." For the first time, Layla didn't see just the man who had failed her, but a father earnestly trying to make amends. It didn't erase the pain, but it planted a fragile seed of hope. As the initiative grew, so did the transformation of the Thomas mansion. Once a place of silence and sorrow, the house now bustled with purpose and life. Volunteers filled the halls, their laughter mingling with the sound of Ava's cheerful voice organizing tasks. Even Ronald, once stoic and withdrawn, seemed lighter, his once solemn expression softened by the joy of contributing to something meaningful. One evening, as the three of them gathered around the dining table, Ava raised her glass in a toast. To Mom, she said, her voice bright but heartfelt, and to second chances. Layla hesitated for a moment before raising her own glass. Her eyes met Ronald's as she echoed softly, "To Mom." As their glasses clinked, Ronald felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't perfect, there were still wounds to heal and truths to unpack, but for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that they were on the path to becoming a family. In that moment, he silently thanked Nicole. Her enduring love and legacy had brought them together, proving that even the deepest wounds could lead to new beginnings. The Nicole Thomas Center stood proudly in the heart of the city, its facade freshly painted and adorned with a modest plaque, "The Nicole Thomas Centera Legacy of Love and Justice." Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with activity. Volunteers hurried to prepare for the launch event, arranging chairs and hanging banners that read "United Against Hate and Strength in Diversity." Ronald stood near the stage, fiddling nervously with his tie. Public speaking had never been easy for him, and today's occasion carried far more weight than any boardroom meeting he had ever faced. This wasn't just about him, it was about Nicole, Layla, and Ava. It was about making amends. Layla entered the room, her calm yet commanding presence drawing every eye. She wore a simple dress, and Nicole's cherished gold necklace gleamed softly against her skin. Since joining her father and sister in their mission, Layla had emerged as a natural advocate. Her story, marked by resilience, love, and an unwavering fight against prejudice, had already begun to inspire others in the community. "Ready?" Ava asked, appearing at Layla's side with a clipboard in hand. Ava's tireless energy and infectious optimism had been instrumental in shaping the center's outreach programs. Layla glanced toward Ronald, who was pacing anxiously near the podium. A faint smile tugged at her lips. "He looks like he's about to faint," she joked. Ava grinned. "You should have seen him practicing his speech last night. I'm pretty sure he went through an entire box of tissues." As the room filled with community members, activists, and supporters, Layla and Ava exchanged a knowing glance before joining their father near the stage. The time had come. Ava spoke first, her bright smile instantly putting the crowd at ease. She eloquently described the center's mission, the importance of fostering safe spaces, and the relentless effort it had taken to turn their shared vision into reality. Then it was Layla's turn. Walking to the podium with quiet confidence, she addressed the audience, her voice steady yet deeply personal. "I grew up not knowing my father," she began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "And for years I carried anger and unanswered questions. But I also grew up with a mother who taught me the value of love, resilience, and standing up for what's right. This center is for her, for the strength she gave means for the strength we can offer one another." The crowd erupted into applause, their admiration filling the room. Finally, it was Ronald's turn. As he stepped up to the podium, he gripped its edges tightly, his voice quivering as he began. I stand here today as a man who has made mistakes, grave ones. I failed my family when they needed me most. For years, I let guilt and fear paralyze me, keeping me from trying to make things right. His voice grew steadier as his eyes found Layla and Ava in the front row, their expressions a mix of pride and emotion. But my daughters, both of them, have taught me that it's never too late to change. Redemption is possible if we're willing to confront our mistakes and work tirelessly to do better. This center isn't just about making amends. It's about building a world where no one feels less than because of who they are. It's about creating a space where love and understanding triumph over hate and fear. And it's about honoring the memory of my wife, Nicole, whose courage and love have brought us here today. The room was silent as Ronald stepped back, his words hanging in the air. Then, as if on cue, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. For the first time in years, Ronald felt at peace. This wasn't the end of their journey, but it was a beginning, a tribute to Nicole's legacy and a promise for a better future. Of many in the audience, Ronald stepped back from the podium. His heartfelt speech met with a standing ovation. The room filled with applause, a collective acknowledgement of the journey he and his family had taken to reach this moment. The rest of the evening became a celebration of hope, unity, and second chances. Workshops buzzed with energy, speeches ignited inspiration, and personal stories flowed freely among the vibrant, hopeful crowd. Layla found herself at the center of attention, surrounded by people eager to learn more about her journey and the strength that had carried her through. Ava, ever the organizer, moved swiftly from group to group, ensuring every detail of the event unfolded seamlessly. As the evening drew to a close, Ronald joined his daughters by the entrance of the newly inaugurated Nicole Thomas Center. The three of them stood together, hand in hand, as they watched the last of the guests depart into the night. The center was no longer just a building, it had become a living testament to resilience, forgiveness, and the unyielding power of love. Ronald, gazing at his daughters, felt a renewed sense of purpose bloom within him. What began as an effort to atone for past mistakes had grown into something far greater, legacy that would endure for generations. The family lingered there for a moment, basking in the warm glow of the center's lights, which seemed to mirror the warmth they had rediscovered in each other. Together they had transformed grief into meaningful action, pain into pathways of healing, and silence into a voice that now had the power to inspire countless others. This is more than just a story, it's a testament to the enduring power of love, the courage to confront past mistakes, and the strength found in forgiveness. Ronald Thomas, a man burdened by regret, embarked on a deeply personal journey to reconnect with the daughter he had unknowingly abandoned, Layla, and to honor the memory of his late wife, Nicole. Through tears, anger, and ultimately healing, Ronald, Layla, and Ava transformed their pain into a legacy that would inspire generations. The Nicole Thomas Center. This story reminds us that while we cannot undo the past, we have the power to build a brighter future. The Thomas family's journey from estrangement to unity, from guilt to action, demonstrates how love and perseverance can overcome even the deepest wounds. Their newfound purpose, embodied in the community center, is a beacon of hope, celebrating resilience, diversity, and the unbreakable bonds of family. If this story has touched your heart, show your support by liking this video. Let us know your thoughts. What part of this journey resonated most with you? Have you experienced moments in your life that required forgiveness or a second chance? Share your story in the comments below. We would love to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales that remind us of the strength and beauty of the human spirit. Share this video with friends and loved ones. It might be the reminder they need to embrace hope, forgive, or reconnect with someone they've lost. Together, let's continue to create a community where stories like this bring us closer and leave a lasting impact. Thank you for being part of this journey.